Hello, it's Monday morning, and we all fell back over the weekend, and then the weather changed. The front came through, so I feel like it's Monday morning, and I fell back with the weather changing. So there it is. That's how today is going to go. I am working on Pogo, just this weird plane that actually flew once or twice in the 1960s, I believe. When they were trying to do vertical takeoff and landing stuff. This is, there aren't a lot of parts with this model compared to some of the others I've been building, but it's important to get things in the right order. And I almost got things in the wrong order until I realized what was happening Friday before I moved forward. So I did most of the prep work, I think, on the ladder. I think it's pretty, I just need to check it over again. And if it looks okay, I'm going to start putting it together. That is what I'm going to do. But first, I want to do some test assembly because I'm thinking, as I'm failing to be able to pick up little parts in the tweezers. Come on. Good thing I'm working in the box. I don't want to work outside of the box today because it would be really easy to drop parts. Okay, so this is probably going to take, I don't know, 15, 20 minutes before I can get this little piece of plastic. There we go. I just had to threaten it. That's what I needed to do. So all these little fiddly bits go together to form a ladder. And I spent most of Friday, just a long time on Friday, sanding down parts. They're all bendy. They're not. Yeah. Well, it's just going to be a bendy ladder. So what I have, I could sort of see, is if you can see it, there's these tiny little holes here and here and here, and also on the other side, and there's little braces that go between them. Okay, little fiddly bits that do that. But what there isn't, and this is kind of, I think, kind of strange, is that on the back side, okay, there's nothing here. There's nothing between the two back bits. And so it's really possible when these are put together, okay, that they could just rotate. It won't stay square. So the kit came with these extra little bits of plastic that I might be able to use, even though it's not designed for it. There's a brace on the back to keep it square. Judging by the size, it would probably go like around here. And I think I can just, with contact cement, I can get enough contact there. Maybe I'll flatten the ends. I'll flatten the ends a little bit. That it would brace it. This one isn't going to fit except way at the very top, and there's no point in that because they fit into this platform. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to just modify the kit a little bit so that I'm hoping it's a little bit more stable than it would have been otherwise. And I'm just going to flatten the ends. Well, first of all, I'm going to make sure that that the little mold marks are gone. And I'm going to try to after I check all these parts to make sure that the prep work I did on Friday is still adequate on Monday. I'm going to get out the intact cement and attempt to assemble it. What I'm going to do, though, in the process of assembling, since it's all little bits that have tiny, tiny contact points, is I'm going to adhere the base to a piece of cardboard. But I can make sure things are squared up. Actually, before I even do that, I'm going to clean the box. Why should no? Before I do that, I'm going to check all the parts first and then clean the box. And then I have to sorry. So the combination of a pressure change and like leaf molds and things, it's not so much an allergy as an irritant for me. Got allergy tested, and that's what it turns out, is that they're irritants. But there aren't a whole lot of things to be irritating all the time anyway. I'm going to be sniffling and sneezing, apparently. You seem to have done a pretty adequate job on Friday. There is, I have to not forget this. There is a spot on the up here. There was a hole that needed to be filled in, and now it's filled in, and that needs to be sanded and polished. It's one of those mold circles. The one on this side was raised up, and I could sand that off, and did. On this side was indented. Cleaned up pretty well. It's good. All right. Checking with my fingernail. It seems to be the most accurate way of assessing things. Don't sand it too much because I don't want the patch to come out. So don't want it to show. I'm just going to leave that. This is the pilot figure. The pilot figure really is incredibly badly molded. It's I don't know if you remember, if you saw the silver guy. Hi. Oh yeah, especially with ancient fingers that don't work that well anyway. And then they're rounded, and so tweezers. What happens with tweezers is sometimes that they go flying. That's why I'm doing this stuff inside this little box. So if I drop the part, or if it pops off of the tweezers while I'm working on it, there are higher odds that it will actually land in the box and be found, as opposed to falling onto the floor and going under the workbench and being lost forever. Well, I'll complain about the pilot figure some other time. I need to clean this box. I'm going to just a second here. And then I'm also going to clean the parts as I put them into the box. And I'm just going to use a little isopropyl alcohol here. This is enough to wet the paper towel, but because it's like 99% isopropyl, even though it wets the cardboard, it's not like water. It doesn't mess it up. I'm just getting all the sanding dust off of these. I decided to do the ladder first instead of last in terms of the model, because it looks like it's actually going to be the most difficult, because it's got all these tiny little parts. Most of the parts on the plane are actually quite large. I mean, as far as the models that I've been building go, it's like huge pieces. There's a bunch of tiny parts in here. I'm going to dump them out and clean them one at a time. These are the little braces that go between the front and the back of the ladder. So the adhesive that I'm going to use is going to be contact cement, and I've used that before. A younger, more coordinated modeler would use CA glue, because you put the parts and they're stuck, right? But for me, putting the parts in and having them stick is a liability, not a benefit. Because as I mentioned many times, and it continues to be true, I can't guarantee that I'm going to stick it in the right place. Okay? And that means that if the CA glue just sets up right away, I'd have to break it apart and start over somehow. So the ladder, these pieces come together, and this holds it together on the top. Okay. So that's just fine. That will stay square, but the rest of it won't. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a piece of cardboard, just a small one, and put some sticky tack on it to hold the pieces upright so that I can manipulate them a little bit. I'm especially concerned about not the top, that'll stay square because it'll be attached to this, and I'm concerned about the bottom not turning into a trapezoid, okay, by moving like that. So I'm going to stick the bottom onto a piece of cardboard just to hold it in place. And I'm going to use that too while I prime it and paint it. Hopefully it'll be a stable place to do that. These things are all I think this model turned out to be like 18 years old. So actually I probably bought it 10 years ago or something. Well, as it is. So that's the top. So with the contact cement, what I can do, which is really kind of nice, is I can put the cement on all these little contact points, all these tiny little bits, okay, on both sides and on everything. And I've got a couple of hours, actually, after the cement is applied to assemble the parts. They actually recommend a minimum of 15 minutes of it just sitting around before putting them together, which is fine. But this allows me to get the cement on all the parts and then just kind of stick them together, and it has some flexibility for a little while before it starts to really set up. In fact, it doesn't really fully cure for, I don't know, the better part of 2 or 3 days. Sometimes even then there's flexibility after that. Which in some cases is a real benefit, and in some cases it isn't. I need to get some cardboard here. Yesterday I did a whole bunch of cleanup, and I had these little bits of cardboard left over from doing some painting I had done before. Just little bits of cardboard, which would have been just right. And I threw them away. But I have to say, I'm not worried about any kind of shortage of cardboard because, delivery, we must get half a dozen boxes a week. So there's always kind of a limitless supply of it. There. So I've got this blue sticky tack, which grabs pretty well, but it doesn't clean up. I've also got, I'm going to put these away. Bits of sandpaper and stuff that are now in the way. I'm going to borrow sticky tack from the tops of these holders. This is painting minifigs that go on here and stick, and you can rotate it. It's just a real handy thing. But this doesn't leave that much residue. I'll see if it works. I don't know if it's going to work. I'm going to put little bits of it on the very, very feet of these. And you might say, well, isn't that, if you're going to leave it on here and then paint it, those aren't going to get painted. And my answer is yes, you're right. They're not going to get painted. But that's okay, because even though the whole ladder is painted red, the bottoms are supposed to have like these little rubber tips on them, like you get on the bottom of a chair or a bar stool or something, little rubber tips. So the very, very bottoms of these are going to be painted black. So if a little bit at the bottom is not painted red, that's going to be okay. I guess that'll, if I squeeze it down, it'll kind of work, I'm hoping. Yeah. I mean, it's not holding right now, but this wouldn't be the first time that a plan has failed on this stream. If I knew what I was doing, if I was, one of these master modelers who just can show you exactly how to make something and do stuff and things like that I'd probably not be doing what I'm doing now. But I'm not. I'm just some old guy making models in the basement because I don't have any dungeon tiles or minifigs to paint for a Dungeons and Dragons show. And our DM, Alexis, who is an amazing DM, not just in terms of running the show and the game within the show, but also in terms of just creating an immensely just an amazing world in which to play. So she's the one who said, just keep building models. And I really like the Pogo because it's so bizarre. And I thought, well, why not? It is pretty bizarre. So, and then I looked at it and it looked fairly simple compared to some of the other models I've been building. They've had highly detailed parts like the submarine and the Apollo and the Savoia, which took a while because I was exceptionally careful with that. I don't know if this will work or not. It isn't hurting anything. Here, it actually there like that. Well, the thing to do now is to get out a tiny little pointy toothpick and put infinitesimally small drops contact cement on many, many, many contact points. I mean, just lots of contact points where all these parts will come together. Hopefully they will come together, and we'll see how it ends up looking. I just counted them. There's 24 little contact points that require adhesive. This will take a while. There we go. Yeah, the top of the can always the contact cement gets onto it, and then there it is, stuck. I pull it off with my fingers, which is stupid because now I've got it on my fingers instead of where I want it. Well, there. So many places to start. Let's start with this. This is the thing that goes on the platform that goes on the top. The tiny, probably like 2x2 square, maybe not even that big platform on which the pilot somehow needs to stand while swinging around and climbing into the cockpit. That's one of the reasons why this plane never really caught on, is that getting in and out of it was like just incredibly dangerous. And it was because, I'll show you the picture again in a bit. But it was just a really dangerous thing to do because it was up like 20 feet in the air. You had to climb this really big, crappy ladder. It's not a good ladder. I wouldn't climb on it myself. I just wouldn't. Yeah, and that's what I was talking about, like with CA glue. I managed to get the contact cement in the wrong place. And if that had been CA glue, it would have been a real problem. No, it was just a minor problem. I've got almost half of them. Almost half of the little points contacted. On stick. Tired eyes. I can barely. Well, yeah, I can almost not. I can just barely see why I'm doing this at this age. Why am I doing this at this age? They should be sitting in the recliner watching Wheel of Fortune or something. Yeah, I used to. Things are different when you actually hit this age as opposed to when you're younger. I just have to say, I remember my grandfather, my mother's father, retired, and he just sat in a recliner, in his kind of dining room area, not even a living room. And what I remember is that as he got older, that's all I remember him doing. I thought, oh, that's not good. Good to just do that, nothing else. But now that I'm older than he was when he was doing that, I'm beginning to think, well, it's not such a bad gig, is it? Sitting in a recliner, have your grandkids bring you lunch, that kind of thing. Like I said, the cement, which I'm now slopping over the edges, nice, huh? is quite forgiving. I have, after putting this on, I have 2 hours to get the parts together. And at the rate I'm going here, it's beginning to look like I might need that much time. Okay, I'm going to cap this up and shake it again, because it. So I'm going to be putting on all but these 3 parts. These are the railings that go on the top, and I'll put those on after the rest of this is assembled. And then this is the extra brace that I'm going to be putting on the back of the ladder, which is not in the instructions at all. It's not shown as being in the instructions, but I think would help maintain the integrity of it. That is to say, hold it together. Hold it together. And it being together is the point of this, so put that on after I get the rest of it, because I'm not sure exactly where it will best fit. It doesn't look like I'm getting much on here, and I'm not, because the contact points are really tiny. But if this stuff works the way it's supposed to work, it will grab on to itself and hold the part in place while its orientation and all of that is adjusted. And you get these little strings that are invisible but annoying. I think I've got some on everything that needs to touch something else. Wrap this up. Don't knock it over. That's something I haven't done yet. I don't want to curse myself, but like saying, oh, I haven't done that yet. But what I mean is that I have not knocked over the open jar of contact cement. Okay. I think I'm going to stick them on these bits first. Great. Yeah, that's not adhering. There. See, it sort of grabs on right away. But there's still some flexibility in it, so that I can get it attached on the other side. Yeah, you can see how much it moves, and how much that movement can make it look like not the way it's supposed to. And then this goes on the top and is supposed to make the top square. you can see as I'm doing this how important it is to have these things kind of adhere to each other, right? Otherwise, they'd all be falling off, or they would stick and be in the wrong position. You can also see this. Okay, this is why I made this little brace, which I'm just going to stick it in here to do that, and then I'm going to set it up on end and try to make it square by using these little bits of sticky tack that have fallen off. Now, contact cement is supposed to be on both sides of the point, but I can't do that with this because I don't know where it's going to go. So I can't put the cement on the ladder. Right, I've done this before, and it usually works. Is that it will just grab anyway. Kind of like that. You can kind of see immediately how what a good idea that was to do that. Just lining them up with the other braces, that gives me a target. You can also see how it's turning into a trapezoid. Okay, how it really doesn't want to be square. Yeah, I managed to squeeze that out of position. There aren't any nice. There's no little pinholes for that brace that I added on, and I screwed it up. I just squeezed it too much and squeezed it while I was trying to get these sticky tack things on. Squeezed it out of position. I need to keep trying. It'd be nice if those stuck to the cardboard, which they're not doing. Okay, this is failing. I need to put more cement on this and hope for the best. This is an important modification to the model. It actually is, to keep it sort of square. If I'd used the blue sticky tack, it it would be sticking to the cardboard. This stuff isn't really doing. But it would also be creating a real mess on the model. In that it would be sticking to it. It's just a little bit below the other rung, but it's just a little bit below the other rung, the same amount on both sides, pretty much. I'd like to get it better. I think that looks okay. So there's a torsion in it, but it's just because the parts are warped. I can't do much about it. Really, it's just twisted, and everything just needs to be, well, it's just twisted. But it's vertical. And if it's going to be untwisted, it has to be, it's not a matter of the parts that have just been put together. It's just that the parts themselves are, okay, let me put these guys on. But what will happen to this ladder now is that it's going to get primed, white primer, and after the primer is dry, it's going to get painted red. So I will have a twisted, red, really horrible ladder. Just not horrible in that the model is horrible. Horrible in that the use of it was a horrible thing. And I'll show you on the picture. It really is. It's really kind of frightening what the pilot had to do to get into the cockpit of this plane. Yeah. So after this, I'm going to be pulling out parts of the big parts and the landing gear. The landing gear are kind of a joke. I mean, it is actually just pretty hilarious how they were, what they were. This whole thing, I don't, it's kind of like someone said, let's make a really weird plane. And everybody went, yeah, that sounds like fun. So they made a fuselage and they stuck this counter rotating propeller up on the front of it. It's the only part that seems to be really engineered. And they said, okay, let's stick it on its tail. In order to do that, we have to have all sorts of, symmetric. We can't just have a vertical stabilizer because then it would, fall over. So they had to put a vertical stabilizer on the top and the bottom. Create this kind of four-way configuration. And they said, well, what do we do about wheels? Be nice to have wheels on it so we could, like, I don't know, push it around on the ground maybe. Because it lands vertically and takes off vertically, so you don't need it for taxiing. In fact, it can't taxi. There's no way this plane can, because once it's vertical, the only way that the propeller is going to pull it is up. So it'd have to be pushed around after it was landed or before it took off. So you'll see in a bit. So it's like, well, if you're just pushing something around, what do you put it underneath it? You put casters underneath it. And that's what they did with this plane, is that the wheels are like furniture casters. I mean, really big ones, but that's really just all they are. See if I can get these in. These are the knee-high guardrails that are supposed to keep the pilot from falling off the platform while performing impossible gymnastics climbing into the cockpit. And the important thing here is to get them vertical. Lift it up. I'm going to go down at it like this. Huh. They're surprisingly not bad. Just needs to not be played with. You have to resist the temptation to continue to play with it when I shouldn't. But I do need to move it out of the box so that I can use the box for some other parts. You can see that it's twisted. Just the parts are warped. So let me show you a picture of what it's supposed to look like. This ladder was built by a master modeler. You can see it's beautifully put together. It's nice and shiny and red. But the way this works is, there's no side guards on the ladder. I mean, seriously, this thing's like 20 feet high, right? So you climb up this ladder, and it's just metal rungs. Hopefully you got good boots and gloves because it would really hurt your feet otherwise. You climb up this ladder to this tiny little platform, and it really is. It's like barely shoulder width. So however wide it is from shoulder to shoulder, that's about as big as it is. You climb up to on it. These come up to about your knees, so there's no real, other than a grab bar, at the very top. There's no real protection, and you can see there's a gap between there and the fuselage, a pretty big gap. And somehow you're supposed to get from this platform into this. So somehow or other, assuming the canopy opens up somehow, okay, and it's probably like sideways, I'm guessing, that you somehow get your foot up there. There's nothing to grab onto. I don't know. I'd love to see a video of somebody climbing from this tiny little platform, this 1.5 by 1.5, barely shoulder width platform, stepping up onto the back here behind the seat. This is all vertical, remember? Okay, it's not like you're dropping into it. It's vertical. You're standing, you're getting your foot from here to here somehow. There's nothing to grab onto except maybe a handhold on the side of the canopy that we can't see. You climb onto the back of the seat, okay, because how else can you do it? It's vertical, right? Climb onto the back of the seat and somehow push yourself into it. And then coming out, I don't know, I guess you rotate yourself around and step down. There probably is some video of somebody climbing in to this, but you can just see that entrance and egress are just an amazingly difficult thing. So this is what I was talking about. So it lands, and there's this huge vertical stabilizer, but there's one on the bottom of the plane as well, so that it's supported on 4 points. And you can't use a regular landing gear, okay, because it goes up and down. So they look at them. They really are like little furniture casters, big furniture casters, I guess in this case. They're large ones, cart casters, and they on each of the points. And then you just push the plane around. That's all you can do with it. You just push it around because that's how it works. I think this is like a turboprop. I think there's a jet engine in here that spins the propeller, like a turbine engine, because there's no room up here for a piston engine. So there's probably like a turbine engine back here with a long drive shaft that goes through underneath the pilot's legs. But the furniture casters they go into the wings. You can see how they do that, and the stabilizer. Nice. Banged that pretty good, didn't I? So in terms of the model, when the two halves come together, okay, when those pieces come together, this has to be inserted. And I was almost going to glue these together before putting those in which case then they wouldn't go in. They'd never go in. So I'm going to prep the casters and the little shafts that they're on. Do that first, because those need to be, if I'm going to prime the ladder, I can prime these at the same time, because they need to be painted before they go in, and these things are all clamped together, and then they'll be masked over. They'll be masked over when the whole thing is painted aluminum. So here's the twisted ladder. Okay, and you can see that it is twisted, and I can, sort of rotate it. But the problem is not any of the things that are holding it together. The problem is that the parts, the base parts and the ladder itself are warped. That's ready to be put aside and hopefully not bumped into until I am ready to work on it again. Yeah. Open the box and pull out some parts. Just unwrap the canopy. The canopy is clear plastic. It was not put in a bag or anything. It was just rattling around. I decided to wrap it in a paper towel so that it doesn't get any further damaged. Over here are the decals. And of course, the parts I want are way down at the bottom here. There we are. So these are the casters. This, believe it or not, is the seat. And then these are gears and components of the counter-rotating propellers. But I'm going to do the casters first, because when I prime the ladder, which I will probably do tomorrow, I'm going to prime these as well so that I can paint them. And on Wednesday, I might actually be painting those. So I'd like to get them prepped, and then maybe even I want to see how they fit in these wings. I might start prepping the wings a little bit. These are actually the stabilizers, I guess. No, these are the wings. As with all of these, there's all sorts of flashing, excess plastic on them. It's all gross. Parts don't fit together very well. They don't line up. When you put them together, there are visible seams all over the place. But the casters go in here, and there's even the suggestion that they're supposed to move. So yeah, once these are cemented together and clamped, I'll be spending a lot of time cleaning up the seams so that you can't see them. I've, in the past, have had fairly good success at being able to sand down seams so that they are not visible. See if that success will continue. Look at that. Wow. Those parts, when these are clamped together, you can see this, right? Look what happens. There's this big gap there. What's up with that? Is it supposed to be like that? I guess it's going to require a fairly strong clamping there because it bends the part. Right. Well, I don't want those now. I want to remove the landing. They're not even landing gear. I don't even know what to call them. The wheel things. Remove them from the sprue, and then clean them up because they're really messy. They really are quite messy. And then I want to see what happens when they are inserted into the wing, because they make it clear that the gears should slide up and down. I don't know why. I don't know why they would slide up and down. I don't know why they would be extended when the plane was landing. They don't fully retract. There's no place for them to retract in. What's up with that? I'm confused. None of these parts are numbered, despite the instructions that say parts are all clearly numbered. None of the parts have numbers on them. Look at that. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, so you can see on these that there's just excess plastic here. Okay, a little bit there, quite a bit here, where it comes up like that. But these two, like these giant prongs sticking out. Yeah, and it's the same. Yeah, those things are sticking out in the same place as these little bits here, so they're not supposed to be there. Going to saw them off mostly, and then sand them down, sand the rest of it down. And I see how this is. It's just an extension of this, so I don't want to cut it off. I don't want to. Cut it down too far, I'll mess it up. It's a pretty amazing failure of injection molding there. Could have cut more off, but better safe than sorry. Well, this is going to take a while. Need the file and the sandpaper, maybe my sanding block. Yeah, there's excess. I'm just seeing where it's the excess plastic squeezed out between the two halves of the mold, and it's there. I'll get one of these done as a kind of prototype of what it's supposed to look like. I swear that's actually what these are. That they are casters. Seriously, just casters that they grabbed off the shelf somewhere, probably as an afterthought. It's like, wait a second, this thing needs to have some wheels on the bottom so we can move it around. Not that it can taxi on its own, but that we can push it around. Does anybody have any wheels? And I say, oh yeah, I got some here over in the parts supply section. And they just grabbed some off the shelf. stuck them on the bottoms of the wings. That's why not. The 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 two halves of the molds, there's always a little bit of plastic, always, that oozes out between the two parts of the mold. And then it leaves a visible raised ridge on the part, which is especially visible on things that are supposed to be round like this. White on white, like it is here. It's sometimes pretty hard to see it. And then they get painted, and there it is. I've had that happen, where it goes all the way to the point where it looks okay, it looks pretty good, and it gets all the way to the point where it's painted, and then it's, oh, no. There's a whole seam line there, a whole line that's highly visible, and then it's, well, sand the paint off, sand down the thing that wasn't sanded to begin with, and then repaint it. What I'm going to do with this, since I've got one, I'm going to get out those two pieces of the wing that I showed you before, and I'm going to try to see how this is actually supposed to fit into the wing and what it means when it's supposed to freely go up and down. That's what it says. The gears should slide up and down. So it makes sense that this would go in and rotate. It doesn't. Okay. This is just really dumb. Okay, so this little ridge here goes, when it's sitting, it sits on that, it keeps it from going, but then it does. Why? Why would it do that? It flops around. So when the model is sitting, it's going to sit like that anyway. And then when the model takes off, the landing gear pulls out and gets in the way of your flight. I just have to say that's kind of dumb. I do want it to rotate, though, because, furniture casters like this should rotate. That makes sense. How it works, so that's how it's going to work. I have to look at these through my head magnifier. I can see I get like 90% of this cleaned up on all 4 of them, and then put my head magnifier on, because I can't really feel a ridge on there, but it doesn't look, it's not round. It's part of it. It's kind of like oval shaped. I've seen this scene. I'm just starting to imagine it. There's one. I don't need these anymore. I've now determined how they fit, and I'm not impressed. They're the ones that's really messed up. Sanded that down better. So one good thing about this now, it's Eastern Standard Time. It was Eastern Daylight Time up until Sunday, and then we fell back. The clock's back, and so for the first time since I think April, when daylight saving time started, I think it's April, maybe March, I don't know, one of those months in the spring. My wall clock is correct because it never changed. It never got changed for daylight saving time. And it was always an hour off, and now it's correct. So I can tell that it actually is 11:30, pretty close to 11:30 anyway. Yeah. Whereas before I had to do clock arithmetic in my head. Ooh, I could do that to determine what time it was. Close to it. I don't want to scratch it up. 400 on it and then polish it. So these are actually going to get painted 3 different colors. The wheels are black because they're supposed to be rubber, so I'll be using flat black on that. These bits here, the things that hold the casters, okay, get painted aluminum, I'm going to use a dark aluminum color. And since these move, okay, up and down, they would be highly polished. So I'll paint those chrome. And that's how this will be done. Probably I'll paint the dark aluminum parts first, and then the wheels, and then the chrome bit. Take too much off. I need to try to keep it kind of level. I can still feel a little bit of a ridge there. It's up high. The seams on this between the molds are is really obvious. It's really obvious. I started looking into you get these tiny little sanders that are supposed to make this happen a lot faster than hand sanding. I don't know if that's really the case or not. Sometimes if it goes too fast, it takes too much plastic off, and it's really hard. I mean, it's a lot easier to sand down excess plastic than it is filling in, building up filler, and building up the filler. And they're not supposed to have little excess plastic ridges all around them. The other thing, though, is they have tiny little, like a half-inch, maybe by a quarter-inch sanding heads with little bits like about that big of sandpaper that attach to them. And these things, depending on what kind of sandpaper they use, but this paper, it's fine grit and all, but it fills and loses its abrasiveness really fast. The same thing happened with that, and I'd be switching out tiny little bits of sandpaper constantly, and I don't see that that's going to save much time. It's where it sort of looks like I got it clean, and then it sort of looks like I don't. So that's why before I finish, before I declare them ready to be painted, I want to look at them through the head magnifier, because then I can still it'll have more light and it'll be magnified, because that's what it does. So I'll be able to see if I got the seam marks removed or not in a way that I can't see without them. You need to worry about this little blob on top that will be invisible. But this strut is just so dumb that these things slide up and down. Because you would expect that you would slide them down when it's on the ground, right? And then push them up when you're flying. But it didn't latch in place. So, like, for example, you would expect, even with the model, that when these were extended, there would be like a latch. I'm going to try that again, because it just seems like something's missing in terms of that. That is to say that they would lock in place when they were down. You would think that that would happen. It didn't. That's a okay. That's actually a problem. Like I said, these things aren't round. Okay. No, they do sort of rotate. They still do, but they're. You'd think it was on the ground, it would lock in place, but it doesn't. So there's no reason for it to be extended. Kind of sticks a little bit when you pull it really tight. It's just kind of a bizarre thing. Well, the whole plane is pretty bizarre. Authentic decals. I think that means that they're actually really decals. Okay, they're authentic decals. It doesn't mean what does authentic refer to? The decals themselves. Why would they sell a kit with inauthentic decals? Then they wouldn't be decals if they weren't authentic decals. A lot of ambiguity in language, isn't there? Okay, well, other than this not being round, which because they just didn't mold it round, there, two of them are done. If I can get these prepped well enough and primed, then I should be able to do some quasi-relaxing painting. Some potentially not too terribly exacting, but it'll be messy anyway, painting on Wednesday. I haven't done painting in quite a long time, except for tiny bits of touch-up on the Lotus Ford. Little bitty bits of aluminum paint on one of the parts. Mainly it's been filing and sanding and decal applications. So if things go okay, you never know. Usually I always say if things go okay, on Wednesday when I come back to the stream, the ladder should be red. It'll still be distorted. Okay. It'll still be warped because the parts are warped. Is going to mess with it at the moment because I want the contact cement to not. I want it to stay sticking. I want the adherence. I want it to adhere to itself the way it should. Oh yeah, sorry, I was paying attention to what I was sanding here for a reason. So on Wednesday, the ladder should be red, shiny red. It should look okay, not terrific because it's warped. Okay, so it should look okay and red, and it will be done. And if I had a box for this, which I don't, it's going to be weird. I need usually, nice horizontal boxes are the best, but with this, it needs to stand upright. So I'm going to need a vertical box about, I don't know, a foot high maybe. 8 by 8 by 12. Well, we keep having stuff delivered. One of those might show up. Actually, I think I just threw away some. We have some Halloween decorations that came in those kinds of boxes, and I recycled the boxes. It probably would have been just right. Yeah, I'll look in the recycling bin, see if I can pull them out. If not, we ordered more on sale post-Halloween inflatables. We put up inflatables like the big ghosts and dragons and cats and things like that, because they make a big impression because they're big, but then they collapse into a nice small thing for storage, unlike the hard decorations, which require a lot of storage room. So we like the inflatables because they make really nice big Halloween decorations, and then they can be fairly easily stored. Guessing a box for one of those would be just what I need. I'm going to measure this to see. After I'm done sanding these bits down. Well, there isn't too much more to talk about in terms of talking about what I'm doing. Friday, I was doing kind of a retrospective on telephones. It's talking about how telephone technology changed as I was growing up, from the black desk model with straight cords that plugged into the wall that couldn't be modified except by a telephone company technician, that was actually leased from the phone company, not owned, all the way now to where if you've got handsets at all, they're all wireless and scattered throughout the house. Mostly people have these smartphone things that they very rarely use as phones. Probably their least important function is actually being a phone. And in fact, as telephones go, they're really not very good. They really aren't, because that's not what they're made for. They're made for people to click on things and buy stuff. Watch ads by scanning through things that they're streaming. They don't really need to talk to each other anymore over long distances. So much for telephones. But it was fun talking about how, if you were in a city and you wanted to talk to somebody in a suburb or a town nearby, at one point you actually needed to go through operator-assisted long distance in order to do that. It was pretty expensive, so you just didn't talk to anybody who was very far away unless it was very important. And then if they weren't there, you couldn't leave a message because people didn't have answering machines. I don't know if people can even imagine what life was like with that kind of stuff, that kind of communications or lack thereof. Now you can do international video calls It's unheard of. Picture phones. I didn't talk about that. That was a science fiction thing when I was growing up. No, it really was. It would only show up on like spy thrillers or science fiction. And you can imagine that a picture, yeah, really, they were, you didn't have picture phones initially. I mean, theoretically, it was possible. You'd need to have a video camera and a screen. But video cameras were like massive things, and just huge things, like a foot and a half long. They'd weigh 20 pounds, even the smallest of them. Okay. And the picture had to be on a cathode ray tube because there weren't any flat panels then. Didn't happen. And so video calls, video phones, when I was growing up, were things of science fiction. You only see them in movies or television shows where they would mock them up, essentially emulate what they would look like by burying a television screen in a wall of things with flashing lights and whatever to make it look like it's a big electronic thing. Tiny screens, they would be, I mean, now you've got phones, so they are tiny screens, but back then it would be like an 8-inch black and white television screen. I'm just remembering that because, you just get on a internet communication service, and I probably shouldn't name any. I could, but you know what they are because you all use them more than I do. And you can make 5 fairly high quality video calls to any place in the world practically. But no, when I was growing up, that was a science fiction thing. I mean, even like the Pentagon or whatever probably were some of the first to do it. But you'd have to have a full-size television camera, and it would use up huge amounts of bandwidth, which was very expensive then, even on landlines, which are carried by telephone cables. Okay, those had limited capacity, which is why telephone voice had frequency clipping. It didn't even transmit all of the frequencies of people's voices. Cut out the very high ends and the low ends. So people had, a high-pitched voice. Sometimes were practically unintelligible on the phones, but, sending a television signal through a wire would used up all the capacity. Nobody else could use that if somebody else was doing a video call. So I'm just guessing that the first ones were like military government applications. So they could commandeer the bandwidth on whatever cable or have dedicated lines for their transmissions. So yeah, I mean, that was things that that people looking at it said, yeah, this could theoretically exist, but practically it's just not going to happen. If you wanted to, when it first started becoming a technology, video conference calling, for example, you'd have a dedicated room for it, special equipment to have a camera and a screen to project the image and that sort of thing. Wow. That's different than it is now, that's for sure. Seriously, now it's hard to imagine not being able to have a video call. Yeah, other things that were wrist radios. That was another science fiction thing. I think Dick Tracy was a detective. I think the comics had wrist radios. They were the size of a wristwatch, a little bigger, and there wasn't any video because it was pretty tiny. But you could just talk into your wrist. Speakers, and now you could have those, but you don't bother because you got these smartphone things. I have to say that back in the 50s and 60s, especially when science fiction stuff, space travel and things like that were big, you'd have speculation about how things would happen that it almost all turned out to be wrong. For example, space flight. Check out a classic like 2001: A Space Odyssey. 2001. Okay, that was 24 years ago. But when it came out, it was that far in the future, and it was totally believable when that movie came out, and it portrayed tourist flights to a space station, expensive probably, like tourist flights on a space plane to the space station and the permanent base on the moon, that seemed plausible at the time because it was 20 some years after the moon landings, and the moon landings happened only like 12 years after the first artificial satellites were put into orbit. And so the pace of advancement in space flight was just incredible. But then it stopped. It was economically pointless. The economy changed significantly, so there wasn't just a whole lot of money around. Won't get into why that happened, but taxes, more spending, that combination led to a deficits, and that became an issue. But anyway, that it was perfectly conceivable that 2001: A Space Odyssey was not out of the realm of possibility. I held a computer. That all kind of happened. But one thing that almost all science fiction in the 50s and 60s got wrong was communication. Okay. They didn't anticipate things that we just seem to be really obvious. Like flat panel TVs, really. Much less a thing like a smartphone. Okay, you could have maybe a wrist radio or something, or video call or something like that, but they were still Well, I think part of it was because they had to portray them using bits and parts that were available for low budget television and movies. Right? I mean, you could only portray what you could buy in the prop shop, but still, it that was the big miss. The big miss of science fiction was the miniaturization of computers, because computers were still gigantic things. You know, tape reels and things like that. In communication, especially the smartphones, nothing. I mean, there might have been something. I can't say nothing, but I'm not familiar with anything really that portrayed anything like them back then in the 50s and 60s. Star Trek had their communicators. Right? Not even close, is it? Yeah. The upside of these magnifiers is that I can see what needs to be done. The downside is that all the flaws become really obvious. Well, unless you're like a super modeler, way beyond anything I can do. I suppose there are people who are so good at this that when somebody comes over to admire their models, they would actually give them magnifiers to look at it. They could admire the impossibility of doing what it is they did. But they'll keep repeating this with my models. They are best viewed from a distance of at least 18 inches under fairly dim lighting, in which case then they look pretty good. Don't get closer and don't make it brighter. Two down. Seeing anything? Probably not really, just the top of my head, huh? Yeah, so when I look back at what I was growing up with, video calls. Yeah, I mean, I talked about dial phones and headsets, and how the only phone you could get was a black phone that sat on your desk, and you didn't even have a cord long enough to stand next to the desk or sit at it in order to use it. Things that you would consider to be pretty bizarrely primitive now. Then I forgot about video calls. A huge, amazingly exotic thing that was. Made possible really by two things. Two things had to happen, neither one of which would be sufficient. Both of which are necessary but not sufficient. That's a logic thing, right? You can have conditions necessary in order for something to be completed. The components need to be both necessary and sufficient, right? Which means that you have to have them, but either alone or in combination, they have to be enough to complete it. So there were two things that were necessary, but neither one was sufficient. One was the miniaturization of the transmission equipment. That is to say, the cameras and the screens on which it would be projected. You could get by with the gigantic cameras and cathode CRT screens. You could get by with that. With great difficulty and expense. In order to make it practical, they needed to be much smaller. So that required transistors. And even though you didn't need a flat screen TV to make it work, okay, that would come later. But the other was, and this is maybe the one that you wouldn't think of, is what we consider to be bandwidth, which is the carrying capacity of the thing that's transmitting it. And most of it was transmitted over wires and cables. And it was in practically everyone's interest, not just people who would make money, the volume of the number of calls. Okay. But the cables over which they ran, the copper cables, had pretty limited carrying capacity in terms of the amount of data that they could send. Back in the day, it was all just analog and sequential. It wasn't until things got digitized and got interlaced, which increased, even using the old cables, the amount of data that could be carried in a particular period of time. But video of any kind of quality at all required just massive amounts of data compared to voice, especially since the voice, as I said, was filtered. So even that was kind of truncated in terms of what was carried. Many frequencies were simply filtered out and not transmitted, which, allowed more voices to be carried over the same wires. So it was the creation of bandwidth, a lot of which had to do with the digitization of video in particular. And it all had to come together really to make it work. lots of things are similar to that in terms of, what made it possible. Like many of the things we just take for granted now are made possible by really amazingly cheap memory, digital storage. I was learning computers back in college. We didn't have them in high school. You just didn't. They didn't exist at the high school level because computers were these gigantic mainframe things that existed only in the computer lab, and you got to stand seriously behind a window and look at them. Technicians scurried about these. This is even after they were past vacuum tube stage. I got into graduate school. There were what we call mini computers now, like PDP 10s and 11s that were, I don't know, the size of refrigerators, kind of. Not side-by-side refrigerators, top-bottom refrigerators. So they, yeah. But even then, memory was kind of, for the most part, measured in kilobytes, not megabytes. The first hard drives were gigantic. They were like 15 inches in diameter, about 2 inches thick. Well, the cases that they came in, because they were in these cases that actually had carrying handles on them. Yeah. So programming had to be amazingly efficient. Data compression for storage was critical. I wrote a program once that compressed ASCII characters. That was most characters. Like 3 times over, I could get 3 times as many ASCII characters into a word of memory as they would ordinarily take. It was a very short program. It was like 12 steps or something, 12. And it was really, and it had to be, the compression program had to be incredibly efficient as well, because there was no memory storage to hold the, especially active memory, that the computer accessed. In fact, the first computers I worked on, which were the first kind of little computers, mini computers, were laboratory control devices. And they had half a K of memory. Okay, can you even imagine what that would be like? It was half a K, okay, in terms of words, not bits, but in terms of words of memory. 500, not 500,000 or 500 million, 500 words of memory. And that was it. That all the program and the data that had to be accessed by the program had to fit into that many words of memory. Like one instruction took up a word of memory. One ASCII character, like a number, like one number. It was binary, right? So you could have, it wasn't like a digit, but a number filled an entire word. They didn't do terribly much alphanumeric stuff. It was almost all numeric because, a number would take up a word of memory, but for alphanumeric stuff, each letter took up a word of memory. So if you wanted to say stop, it took 5 words of memory. When you only had 500 to work with, that was like 1% of your memory just to put a 5-letter word in. But we didn't do much of that. Although I did get clever. I taught the machine how to play hangman, but I could only put 1 word at a time into active memory, so it drove off of a magnetic tape, cassette tape. The words were stored on cassette tape, and it would read the word off of it, put it into memory. I think I went up to like 8-letter words. And then it would read a letter that you typed in on a teletype machine. You know, you look it up. It's hard to describe. A teletype machine, you type it in, and it would punch the ASCII character onto a roll of paper tape. Okay, so each time you touched a key, it would punch an 8-bit character onto a piece of paper tape, and that was our major source of storage until we were able to get the computer to read and write onto cassette tapes. So when we were running an experiment, and like we were doing a reaction time thing or something, it would punch the number onto this tape, and our data storage were big reels like that of paper tape that had to be read for data analysis into the mainframe computer at the computer lab. Mm-hmm. Wow, it was really a different time, as you can begin to imagine. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is I could paint and prime these by laying them down and flipping them over. But what I'm going to do instead, since there's a little bit down here, this little bit down here, as you saw when I was putting them in and out of the wing, doesn't show. So I'm going to try this. I can find them. Oh, there they are. I haven't used them in a while. Oh, that's good. I reached over and didn't knock over the ladder. I'm going to clip this onto an alligator clip. Okay. So this little knob at the end here, well, let me check before moving ahead with something that could turn out to be a disaster. This goes in like this, pulls out. Oh yeah, yeah, that hole, it doesn't show. It only goes that far, you can see. So I can clip that there, the alligator clip. Yeah, that's pretty stable, and put it here, and then I can prime it. I'm not going to paint it, that's going to be hand painted, but I can prime it, the whole thing, without having to turn the part over, which makes for much better painting. You can see these have been used before with green paint and red paint. And yellow paint, but that doesn't matter to the clip. It doesn't care that it's been painted. Okay, so these guys are going to get primed. And then in terms of painting, just show you one. Okay, this part here that holds the caster, this bit here is going to be painted kind of a dark aluminum color. The wheel is painted black because it's rubber, and the rest of this will be painted chrome because it's actually supposed to move. Okay, so it'd be like pneumatic and be bright chrome color. Well, unless those pop off of there, which they could, I'm going to keep it in here for safekeeping. What I can do next is, I've got what, 45 minutes? I could start prepping the parts, the big parts. Take the wings off. The wings are already off the sprue if they ever were on. I don't know if they ever were. There. So take all of them out. And you can see how messy they are. Look, I mean, the flashing along there, along the seam line. Just, who knows what happened here? That's really bad. There wasn't even any sprue there. It's just a blob of plastic that adhered when it came off of the mold. That's not good. But, you know, it's typical, not very well done molding of parts. But there aren't very many of them. Okay. The wings, the tops and the bottoms of the wings, you know, that's a separate two bottoms. Okay. The clothespins. I'll be using lots of clothespins to clamp these together to make sure that they're really tight so that the cement oozes out. I want it to ooze out and fill the gap, you know, seam, like along the side here. I want the parts to go together, first of all, but I want them, once they're aligned, I want the cement to ooze out a little bit to fill this gap. Now, this would be really nice if they had an alignment pin on the bottom. Fill the gap. Well, yeah, the fronts, I don't know if you can see that, but these parts don't match up. There's like a 64th of an inch here of overhang from the bottom to the top. And then, of course, this is designed to bend down and be clamped. So even on like the leading edge of the wing here, okay, where it doesn't quite fit together for a reason, I don't know why, the fit is not tight. The alignment pin is too big, maybe. Yeah, I mean, the alignment pin fits into the little divot, but it doesn't fully clamp. So I'll make that a little shorter. But like on the leading edge, you can even see there's a little bit of a seam that shows there. So the cement oozes out into that. And then it melts the plastic, so it essentially welds it together. And then it's possible to sand it down, destroying a little bit of the rivet detail. That is inevitable, at least at my skill level, so that the seam doesn't show. And I've been able to do that with a fair amount of success, but you can see that, this needs to clamp up here, clamp back here, clamp here, here, here. It's going to be like 8 clothespins holding onto this thing all the way around the perimeter to make sure that it's clamped tight along the edge. But I'm not, I have to remember, don't do that until the little landing gear, the furniture casters are actually installed. Yeah, so the challenging part is just going to be to get it lined up while it's being clamped. You can see right off, the wings are one thing. Clothespins will hold those really nicely. But the fuselage is a different story. Because when it's put together, kind of, oh, yeah, that's a problem. When it's put together, it's fat. Okay. It's fat. And so, yeah, these you can, oh, that's really not lined up at all. Great. So it's like the two halves don't really line up. That's a great thing. There we go. So a fair amount of the prep work, even getting rid of some of this flashing and stuff, I'm probably not going to bother doing that until the whole thing is cemented together, because that all needs to be filed and sanded off anyway. No, that's great. So you look at the back. Paint that flat black for the inside here. The inside of where the turbine exhaust is. It's not like it's really totally jet powered. It's a turboprop. But I don't want to, unless I paint the whole inside flat black, which I guess I could. I think I'm going to put like some sort of baffle in there. I might fabricate something that will just fit in there. Close that up. So these alignment pins really are kind of helpful. Look at that, it's built to have a seam. The modeling in book that I bought once that said this is how to make models good actually suggested sanding those off because they get in the way more than they help. And then sanding it flat so you didn't have a seam. I've tried that and it doesn't, I don't know, it's hard to get these things to line up and clamp them at the same time. So I'll have to be painted flat black before the nose is on, because I'm sure the nose is not going to fit very well. Propeller assembly. What I do know is that this bit where the sprue is attached is in the way of the front of it coming together. And I'm on. Thanks for joining in. Okay. So there was one giant monster. I'm assuming you defeated it because you're still alive. Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so you should be like on the hunt through the campaign. Sometimes that's really true. You know, the DM comes up with a really cool thing like that, and there's no way to build it into an existing campaign, or you don't have an existing campaign, and you just one shot it, and you go, "Well, this could have been the basis of a whole story arc." But how did the session go? Was it fun anyway? And how did your character play? I think you were playing a tiefling, right? No, I don't. So tell me about the Hydra. I know what a Hydra is, but I'm not familiar with that. Oh, wow. Okay. So it just if it kills a victim, that victim is not just dead; it's gone. I mean, like erased from all existence. That's pretty amazing. Better do it from this side. If I do it from the inside, I'm not going to hurt anything because this part isn't visible. It's covered over by the nose cone. So I want to remind everybody that I will stream again on Wednesday, and then I'm going to be gone on Friday and all of the following week because I'm traveling, doing some family traveling, and so yeah, one more stream and then away for a while. But I hope that you remember that I'll be coming back. Okay, that analogy with yeah, there's an extra room in the house and it looks like someone was living there, but you don't remember anyone ever being there. That's a really cool ability. No, I'm not familiar with that. Yeah, guest room. I'm sure you'd make up some sort of story because you couldn't remember why it was there otherwise. But in order for it to make any sense at all, it had to be, oh, there's a guest room there. So how did you defeat it? And did everybody survive? Well, you wouldn't know that because if somebody didn't survive, you wouldn't have a memory of them existing. So you wouldn't know if somebody was killed or not because they wouldn't have existed. That's actually pretty interesting. You just punched it. Okay. Just beat on it, huh? Was it a good session anyway? Sounds like it should have been fun. Oh, okay. Not an altogether good thing to win the fight then. I'll test with this again. Much better now that that's out of the way. The two halves sort of, but did not quite match up. This is going to be painted flat black in front. This is the anti-glare panel in front of the canopy. This, believe it or not, this here, this little bit here, that is the sum total of the cockpit detail. Oh no. Okay. So she was too far gone, and even your resuscitation magic wouldn't work. Oh, the memories come back, but the people, okay, the people don't come back. I guess that makes unfortunate sense. Okay, so this is the bizarre fuselage for this thing. It's really, see how bulbous it is like this? Well, I guess the main reason for that is that it's the propeller, it's a turbofan, or a turboprop, I should say, a turboprop. So there's a jet engine, a turbine engine buried in here. It's the exhaust there in the back. And it drives a drive shaft right along here to drive the counter-rotating propellers. And this has to bulge up like that so that the pilot can sit above the drive shaft. How this is put together. So on Wednesday, I'm going to paint the clean this up a little bit. I'm going to paint the landing gear. The essentially what they are is the casters, the furniture casters, I keep calling them, and that's what they are. There's the bit that was preventing the fitting. I'm going to paint those. I'm not sure they're going to dry quickly enough to be inserted. All of this flashing and stuff around here, that all has to be sanded off, but I'm going to wait to do that, intentionally wait to do that until after the parts are cemented together, because all the edges need to be cleaned up anyway, sanded down anyway, because of the seams that I want to not show. You didn't, okay. So you're detective hanging around. Enough to keep your party alive, though, because you all survived. That's good. But if you were prepared for an investigation and research and not for an immediate fight, well, that's what DMs do to parties, right? It is what they do, is they mess with you like that. This is really... Well, the two halves aren't too bad. If they're tightly clamped, then it's not too bad. It's just getting them aligned and then clamped. That's going to be just a little bit tricky. At least they have these molding circles. I've complained about these circles a lot. At least they're on the inside, where they're not going to show. I didn't put them on the outside of the canopy. That was a good thing. A little bit of a divot there. That's not good. To work on that and see if it has to be filled in or if it can just be sanded away. Once this is all done, the wing gets attached to the fuselage. That's usually not a happy thing. They usually don't fit that well. Be finding out. Like something fell. That wasn't a good. You couldn't hear it, okay, because of the filter on the microphone. It's a Hydra and a siren. It has the ability of a siren too. Wow. So you were able to keep things going for a while until you couldn't because you ran out of your can. Yeah. I see what you mean, though, about how when you remember it, you remember the horror. So that's pretty unpleasant. Oh, it's just an aberration. Okay. Wow. Well, your DM certainly wanted this session to be challenging, I guess. I guess that's a word. Challenging. Memorable. Mean. That's not completely mean, but yeah, certainly not a walk in the park, not something that was just simple and easy. Sounds like a fun session. For the most part, it was really fun. Cool. I remember one of these pins. It's this one. Just needed to be filed down a little bit. So it's too high to fit. Okay. So did you know you were going to meet this Hydra before you started? Okay. That's absolutely right. Because of the suppressed memories, it could, the damage it does wouldn't be noticed. Absolutely. That's fascinating. Actually, that's a fascinating characteristic. Putting these together is going to be uh, Yeah, cementing these together when I can't get the parts to line up like this is going to be a interesting challenge, isn't it? No, just a little bit more. I'm getting most of this done, but before I do any cementing, probably not until I get back. We do a lot more test fitting, I think. So what happened between the players and the DM? I mean, that's a much more serious thing, isn't it? Oh, no, you want the, yeah, I can see that. That can really make a big difference. That the monster itself can, the characteristics of the monster itself could be um, damaging to the player's trust. Hmm. That makes the game dynamics really kind of difficult. How did that turn out? Are you okay with the DM after all of this? Okay, yeah. So it forces a situation where even in real life after the game, interesting choice by the DM to choose that monster. Then, just in terms of the dynamics among the players and for the future of your playing together. I wonder if your DM understands. Okay. Well, so is your group going to get back together and do another session? Or was just this kind of like it was a one shot, but is it a one off? Yeah. Okay. Oh, it was good though. I'm glad you had a chance to play. Um, so Haroon, of course, yeah, it was kind of like we had a Halloween special that we did, a haunted Hawthorne Manor, which was a very long one shot. It lasted, I think the session was like 5 or 6 hours long. And it was streamed for this Halloween. Just as a kind of a special. Next Monday. Very good. Well, I'm not going to be here to hear about it. You'll have to fill me in after I get back. Um, in 2 weeks. I'm going to be streaming again Wednesday, and then I'll be away traveling for over a week. So progress on Pogo is going to be suspended after this week, after Wednesday, actually. Both of these wings, this just doesn't fit. The divot's too shallow and too small for the peg. I might end up having to take this off, sand it off altogether. Because I think what's happening here, there's a hole there for this peg to go in, and it's the diameters are not the same. Peg is too big and the hole is too small. It's a good place for an alignment peg, though. That's a good place for it to grab on, because this is challenging up here. But if it causes a separation rather than an alignment, then it's missing the point. Missing the point of its existence. Okay, that's going to require more delicate work than I can do at this point in the stream. Wednesday, I'm going to have to come back to that and figure out how best to deal with it. I either need to get rid of the little alignment pin altogether, is an option. File it down so it's smaller. See this one? That one fits. Sort of. Moving off camera, sorry. There's an alignment pin there that is too big in terms of depth and diameter for the opening. This opening here, or this pin here, don't match up. There's always something with these, right? And this one, this is definitely one of the always somethings here. Grabs on like that. That's a good thing, because this has to be squeezed down like this. Okay, well, the one on this one just isn't working all that well. I'm going to wrap up. My time is closing in on closing time here. You know, oh no. She had somebody visiting and they got sick right away. That's really too bad, because then you were planning all sorts of things to happen and then you couldn't. I'm really sorry to hear that. Are they still there, or were they just here for the weekend? I'm going to put these parts back in the box. Why not? There's no sense to have them laying around. Wednesday, clean up a little bit. Between now and Wednesday, I'll be, all they could do is sit around and groan and feel sick. I'm going to be priming these guys. These are the furniture caster landing gear. Be priming those, and on Wednesday I'll be painting them. There'll be 3 different colors of paint, probably with some groaning and complaining and touching up to make them work. And here's the ladder. This got finished earlier in the stream. This will get primed and painted red. So on Wednesday, you'll see this as being glossy red. Hopefully it'll look okay. And then the final touches are to paint the bottoms of these flat black to represent to represent little rubber feet to keep it from sliding, little anti-slip feet. And the ladder, once those are painted on, the ladder will be done. And then I'll put it in the done box. I'll probably wrap it up in a paper towel and just set it in there. I'm going to wrap up now. I want to thank Aman. Thanks for dropping in. Hopefully you'll be back on Wednesday so that you can see as much as I get done then before I leave on the trip. On Wednesday, I will also be letting people know, if I remember, exactly how long I'll be gone. Okay, because it's a fairly long trip. But yeah, there'll be a ladder, and I'll be doing some painting. I'll be doing some painting on these. And then, depending on how things go, I'll be doing some more test fitting. I'll be doing some test fitting on the fuselage and getting those parts ready to clamp on to these once the paint is dry. And then I'll pull out this propeller assembly, prep these parts, and do some test fitting, because I want to see how. I'm really curious to see how this works. So thanks everybody for dropping in today. Hope to see you on Wednesday. I'm looking forward to that. All right, the weather changed. I mentioned that at the beginning of the stream. Front came through and changed the air pressure and brought some irritants in, making me sneeze. Okay, then. That's what's done so far. As you can see, I managed to spend 3 hours and got practically nothing done, which is typical of this stream. And on Wednesday, I plan to do more of the same, which is to get practically nothing done, but take a long time to do it. See you then. Take care. Have fun, Aman. I hope your friend gets better soon so you can get out and do some things. But I'll talk to you on Wednesday. Bye.